Ukraine's second city is facing its fiercest bombardment since the start of the full-scale invasion. My colleague Paul Sims has been under fire in Kharkiv.
Just inside a tank on our way into Gaza. There is just rubble and destruction as far as you can see.
They're digging in their positions, they're practicing. Pinpoint accuracy over targets is what has transformed so much of this conflict.
This is World at War. I'm Jerome Starkey, and in Kharkiv, at the scene of a devastating Russian missile attack, is The Sun's senior news reporter, Paul Sims. Paul, you've been in Kharkiv for about 10 days now. Can you just tell us what it's been like?
Jerome, it's been relentless since we got here. We're receiving attacks on a daily basis from Russian launch pads over in Belgorod. They're firing in missiles constantly. The barrage is just non-stop. We're getting alerts on a daily basis, morning, noon and night. Since we've been here, we've been to a number of sites that have been attacked. The majority of them are civilian targets. So last week,
well, Paul, can we start with where you are now? It looks to me, I can see the hallmark colours of an Epicentre shopping. That's like a B&Q, isn't it? One of these large DIY home stores in the city. Can you tell us where you are now and what is it that we can see behind you?
Okay, so behind me it's akin to a B&Q store back home. This is known as Epicentre, and it's behind me is 10,000 square feet of shopping centre. We're in a retail park at the moment, so there are loads of shops to my right-hand side and to my left-hand side, restaurants, but behind me is the Epicentre, and there were, according to reports at the time, 200 shoppers inside. They were going in to buy their DIY stuff. I guess that's the incongruity of war, that whilst that is raging on beyond us, normal life to a certain degree is continuing where people are going shopping. And so there were up to 200 people inside on Saturday at about 4 p.m. local time, and they were inside, and at that moment there's CCTV footage that's been released. The building behind me was struck by 2 Russian glider bombs which devastated this area. The place behind me was ablaze. There was thick black plumes of smoke rising into the air. We arrived about half an hour after it happened, and there was pandemonium. As you can imagine, there were firefighters, the military, there were police, and they were desperately trying to dampen down the flames and trying to understand exactly how many people were inside. Since then, the emergency services have been working tirelessly for the last 3 days now to try and sift through the rubble, not just for evidence of war crimes. They're looking for the fragments from the warheads that hit this target, a civilian target, but they're also looking to try and retrieve the remains of those victims who were killed in this indefensible strike.
What's the death toll standing at the moment?
At the moment, the death toll stands at 18. They're saying that they're about 75% through the work of sifting through the rubble behind me. I've been inside it, and it's just a massive twisted metal. Everything is completely burnt, and it's been burnt to the ground. It's going to be an incredibly long task to try and identify the remains. The other day, they were calling on the families of the missing to come down and to provide DNA samples so that they can identify the victims of this strike. And just to put it into perspective for you, one of those that came to this site here was an 8-year-old boy whose dad worked in the decorating section. His dad is among those who are missing. So we've got 18 confirmed dead. We expect that death toll to rise. 45 people were wounded. And so it's going to take some time before we understand the true scale of what's happened here behind us.
It's just heartbreaking. That 8-year-old boy, I mean, perhaps, yeah, symbolising or representing the madness of this war with Russia bombing civilian targets, blasting shoppers as they are on a weekend out. I think you mentioned to me before that these were likely people going out to get the sorts of things that people all around the world buy in springtime to prepare for the barbecue season, to get ready for the good weather.
Yeah, it was Saturday here in Kharkiv. And yes, the war is ongoing. Normal life hasn't resumed for 2 years. There is a sense of normality here. The cafes, people are having coffee, they are having breakfast, they are going out, and they are coming to retail parks like this to buy goods. So that, you know, there is some semblance of normality here, but that is being disrupted on a absolutely daily basis by a Russian aerial blitz that is continuing non-stop. And Zelensky said the other day, President Zelensky said that this was just, like you said, symbolises the madness of Putin, the madness that is prevailing, that they are able to strike places like this. It's civilians, it's a retail park. This isn't a military target at all. But
And
he is
Paul-
striking this to essentially terrorise the city, terrorise the region, disrupt life, and to try and force the locals, the people that live in this city, out.
Paul, in the course of the 10 days that you've been in Kharkiv, this is, I think, at least the third strike. How many missile strikes have you witnessed yourself? And perhaps you could just give us a sense of some of the things you've seen. So
we've been here just over a week now. And when we arrived, there was an initial strike on a transport hub that led to a tram driver being injured. There was another strike 2 days later on the Thursday. You'll remember there was extraordinary footage of a missile strike on what's known as the Vivat publishing press here in Kharkiv. It's the largest printing press here. And an S-300 Russian missile struck that at rush hour. We were some distance away in the city centre. We heard a series of explosions ring out. There was one, then a second, then a third, and they kept on coming. And there were 15 missile strikes through the morning rush hour. We arrived at the Vivat Publishing Company to find smoke billowing out from the building. We went round the back, and there was just this huge gaping hole that had been created by this warhead that had essentially pierced through the building. And just to give some kind of idea as to what we found, that there were the victims, the bodies of those who were killed. There were 7 people killed in that strike, 16 others were wounded, but there were bodies within that building who weren't so lucky, who were killed in that airstrike. There was a huge hole in the ceiling. There was debris absolutely everywhere. Concrete bricks had been thrown far and wide. The firefighters were inside trying to dampen down the flames and trying to get it under control, whilst also trying to locate the bodies of those victims. And whilst they're doing that, alerts were coming through of further incoming. So whilst we were inside the building trying to get an understanding of what had happened, we were having to rush out because of various alerts of further incoming missiles that were headed for that area. So it's a very volatile situation. We're very much aware that when we head to these scenes, there is a potential for a double tap, which essentially is where they fire one rocket in, and then the emergency services head to that scene, and then they fire in another so that they can maximise the casualties and the death toll. And like you said, it's absolute madness, but this is taking place on a daily basis here in Kharkiv. It's being besieged, and all the while, the troops on the front line are trying to peg back Russian troops from advancing further in.
Paul, you and I have both spent a lot of time in Kharkiv, and you mentioned before how, there is some semblance of normal life, but it's not quite normal. I just wanted to ask you, because you're there now, these daily strikes all across the city, I get the impression that nowhere is safe. I mean, how does that affect you? How do you feel about that risk, and how are you trying to mitigate it? How can you try to stay safe?
To a certain degree, it lifts your anxiety. So we're trying to piece together the information. So we have the apps on our phones, like all the people do here in Kharkiv, where we're getting alerts coming through of incoming. The natural course then is to move to Telegram, where we're getting more information from the Ukrainian armed forces, from the various sources, the channels that we use. And it does, I'll be honest, it does increase the anxiety. The people of Kharkiv are being terrorized. And as soon as you're aware that there is incoming, the air raid sirens go off, the alerts arrive at your phones. To a large degree, there's not a huge amount you can do to mitigate that, apart from to head to the air raid shelters or to bunker down where you are. The risk is great. It's essentially trying to stay safe, but moving from day to day, not going any further forward, and just trying. The worst time is, I think, on an evening, because you go to bed, the lights are out, you're lying there, the air raid sirens go off, Telegram lights up, and you're very much aware that this can happen at any stage. And look at behind me; it can happen anywhere. They're not targeting military facilities. They're targeting civilian sites. They're targeting transport hubs that are used by the civilians. They're targeting shops. They're targeting Central Park in Kharkiv. Nowhere is safe. So you have to mitigate that risk, but we also have to be here to be able to report to you what we're seeing and what is happening so that the world understands that this bombardment from Russia is, I mean, it's a war crime. It's arguably state-sponsored terrorism.
Well, Paul, thank you very much for joining me today, and do your best to stay safe. My thoughts and prayers are with you and with the people of Kharkiv, and indeed with that 8-year-old boy looking for his father. I pray that he will get some good news. My name is Jerome Starkey, defence editor at The Sun, and you've been watching World at War. If you're watching on YouTube and you have any questions, please do ask them in the comments below, and we will endeavour to answer some of them next week.